Good morning, YouTube. So I wanted to make this video talking about the 22R and 22RE engines from Toyota. That's what's on my 85 4Runner. So this is the exhaust manifold or exhaust header gasket, and this video is pertaining to people that are running the LCE engineering, or I think they call it LCE performance exhaust header. They have a California Air Resources Board, or CARB, executive order number for that header, so it's Smog legal and all that. I have the sticker. A number of years ago I ran into a problem. I had trouble passing the emissions test on my 4Runner. I was failing with high NOx, and NOx is controlled partly by the catalytic converter but also by the exhaust gas recirculation valve. The idea is the EGR valve takes exhaust gas out of the port here coming out of the cylinder head, and then it feeds it back into the cylinder head through this port, and then that goes back through the cylinder head, and then it goes across the back of the head. There's what they call an EGR cooler. The EGR valve sits back here and then feeds exhaust gas back into the intake manifold. Now, a lot of people, live out of areas where you have to do smog, and they basically delete or disable the EGR valve for whatever reason. I have to keep it running because I need it to pass smog. So one of the issues I ran into, the LCE header does work. I mean, it has a little port here. So yeah, I'll cut in a picture of the flange with the exhaust gas recirculation port on the LCE header. What they did was they just machined a little hole here in the flange. So I don't know how thick the flange is, maybe 3/8 of an inch. And then they've machined about half of that away and made just a little recess here that goes back to the head. So with the LCE header, the exhaust gas comes out of here, and then it's just got that really thin area, and then it goes back into this hole, back into the head. Now I'll cut in a picture of the factory cast iron exhaust manifold, and on that manifold there's actually a passage cast into the cast iron. So the exhaust comes out of here, makes a 180, and goes back down that hole. And there's a flange of cast iron here. So there's a big hole for the exhaust, and then a little hole for the EGR right here. But the difference is with the LCE flange, you just have that really thin milled out passage there, and this exhaust gasket blocks about half of that space because you've got this particular area here. The exhaust is coming out and then trying to go just through that little passage, and what I noticed was over time deposits would build up on this little web of gasket here, and eventually they just build up to the point that it just blocks off that whole passage. So that's what I found was my problem with the high NOx readings. So on the LCE flange, this hole and this hole are joined, and they don't need this little flange here. So the real simple fix is what I've highlighted there in red, is just take a pair of tin snips, and you just want to go right here, basically the width of that hole, and just give it a quick snip, and then just line up on the other side of the hole. You don't want to go too wide, but just go right there, and you take out that little web there, and now the exhaust gas can just flow through this whole passage. And when you put the header flange on, the header flange is going to press against this whole area here, but there's nothing here in the middle. Basically 2 and 3 cylinders are the ones you want to cut out here. So yeah, the gasket isn't going to fail here because, like I say, there's nothing on the LC header flange in this area. It's open, but what this does is it just gives your exhaust gas more of a passage, and with no web in there, there's nothing to build up exhaust deposits. So over time this stays clear because you have the gas flowing through here. So yeah, that's how you do it. You just get rid of those two little bits of exhaust manifold gasket. I'm in an enhanced area, which means I have to do the dyno test. And the dyno test is where they run the engine up to like 3,000 RPM on the dynamometer, and that's when they check for the NOx emissions. And if the EGR is blocked up here, you have high NOx because the engine's really working hard. So yeah, that was my fix. I did this probably 15 years ago when I fixed it the first time, and I've been running that exhaust gasket since I modified it. I took the gasket out and modified it and put it back in, and then now I'm finally having the engine looked at again, and I figure I might as well do the modification. It's easier for me to do it than try to explain to the shop. This sort of thing, it doesn't happen right away, but it's 5 or 10 years down the road, you get that buildup of carbon and whatnot here in the gasket. What I noticed was over the years, every 2 years you went in for a smog check, the NOx reading was a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, and that was due to this little web of gasket basically getting clogged and building up in thickness until the point where there wasn't enough exhaust flowing back through the head. And then the other thing you can do, it's the way they fabricate that header. So they have the flange, and then they bore a hole and stick the header tube up in there, and then they weld around it, and that weld bead also projects into that little pocket because they machine the pocket on the flange, and then they weld the tubing into the flange. And there's a little bit of a weld bead on the edge of that pocket that they put in there. The other thing I did was just right in this area, I just filed down that weld bead. Instead of coming up, it was a kind of a smooth fillet going around the tube. You don't want to file all the way through the tube or you'll get a leak there, but just smooth off that weld. And I did that, and I passed smog tests. So yeah, those two things, cut out this web, then file that little weld bead off, because you're trying to get a fair bit of flow here. Because for EGR to work, you've got to get enough flow back around into the engine so that the exhaust gas dilutes the intake air enough to reduce the combustion temperature, and that's what forms the NOx. Now, of course, yeah, if you don't have to worry about dyno smog tests, you probably don't have to worry about this, but this is just making it work properly. I'm not defeating any functionality, I'm making it work as designed. So yeah, and like I say, this is kind of a problem that builds up over time. Like if you just put in this gasket and tested it for smog tomorrow, it would be fine, but test it 5-10 years down the road, and that NOx reading will just creep up and up and up every year as this gasket just builds up more deposits on it. Just thought I'd throw that out there. If you have one of these engines, you have one of those headers, and you're having trouble passing NOx on a dyno test, this is what you do to fix it. Just get yourself a gasket, cut out those two little webs, and you're good to go. So hopefully that helps somebody. I'll put a link to my web page where I also have a write-up on that, so you can check that out. And as always, thanks for watching.